Some of this, one of the disadvantages of coming third or fourth is that you've heard some of this. So you know that Greencore was set up in 2013 by Martin and myself. Possibly Martin hasn't told you enough about himself, the fact that he is a very experienced director and has focused on strategy, risk management, performance and things, and he keeps me focused. So although I say no, it's under the guidance of people like Martin. You've heard that I've got over 30 years experience of construction. Actually, I did a degree in physics and I worked on building sites during my university holidays, and I thought building was far more fun than physics, so I became a builder rather than a physicist. And I was really lucky that I sort of fell into the repair of historic buildings. At that time, nobody really knew what they were doing with historic buildings. Nobody, or very few people, were using lime in the repair of buildings. And so really we pioneered the use of lime in this area and set up the supply chains. And here are a few buildings that I was involved with in that period between 1987 and 2007. We sold the business in 2007, but we were privileged enough to work on some stunning historic buildings. Because we knew about lime, we got drawn into other things as well. And I searched the internet for one of the first straw bale buildings that I was involved with, and this was about 1996. And looking on the internet recently, I discovered it was possibly the first straw bale building in the country, and we were asked to go along and supply and apply lime render to this. So 1986 was my first introduction really to an eco building. Prior to that, everything I was doing was on historic buildings. One of the scary things is that mankind has doubled its CO2 emissions since 1996. So those last 25 years, we have emitted as much CO2 as we did in the previous millennia put together. And so this was my first introduction to eco building. It took a little while to sink in, and it wasn't really until 2002 that I was involved in setting up lime technology, and the mission there really was to bring lime mortar into new buildings to replace cement mortar. And we were really fortunate. We won some fantastic projects. We did St Pancras Station, which was just being redeveloped and rebuilt for the Channel Tunnel Rail Link Terminal. So when Martin says we've got some ambitious plans, but it's in line with some of the things we've done before, St Pancras at the time was part of the biggest construction project in Europe. It was the Channel Tunnel Rail Link to Dover. And we supplied lime mortar as a sustainable alternative to cement mortar to several hundred, probably getting into thousands of buildings. I then came across an architect working in Suffolk called Ralph Carpenter, who was mixing lime and hemp together. And I went to a talk that he did and I thought, what a great technology, we should be involved in that. So we jumped in at the deep end and started playing around with lime and hemp, doing research with Bath University. Mike Lawrence from Bath University, ex-Bath University, is here, and we did probably 12 years of research with Bath University to actually learn how to use this material. And these are some of the housing projects we did. Interestingly, the one on the right there is in Suffolk. We did with David Michal and Annalee Riches, who've just won the Sterling Prize for their scheme in Norwich. We did a lot of private houses in lime and hemp as well, and non-domestic buildings. The one on the right there is the Wales Institute for Sustainable Education at the Centre for Alternative Technology in Machynlleth. So, although Greencore's been going for 5 or 6 years, we've got quite a long track record of doing these sorts of things. And since we set up Greencore, we have been on a plan that we acknowledged was going to be a 15-year plan. So what have we done so far? Well, we have developed and honed our building system, which we call Beyond, spelt bio with an ND on the end, and we did that working with Bath University. It's a closed panel timber frame system that's insulated with lime and hemp and natural fibre insulation, and we set up an on-site factory that's run by Rob, who's here if anybody wants to talk about that. We've built a team who design, manufacture and construct these buildings, and we think we've got a combined experience of 90 years in doing passive house construction. We've built 44 houses since 2013, and we've currently got 25 houses on site at what we think is the greenest scheme in the country at the moment. We would love to be proved wrong, and we put that challenge out there to people. I'll explain more about that one in a minute. You've heard from Lewis about climate change. We've got this target to try and keep the global rise in temperature to less than 2 degrees and preferably 1.5. Actually, we've possibly already missed the 1.5 threshold, and we're now trying to keep it below that 2 degree threshold. And although we've got this target of 2050 to be zero carbon, we probably need to go faster than that. We are seeing things happening on a regular basis. One of the subtle things about climate change is that we don't necessarily see things that we haven't had before. We just see them happening a little bit more extremely and a little bit more frequently. So last year we hit the hottest day ever recorded in the UK. We're seeing all of these bushfires in Australia. And those people who deny climate change can quite easily say, well, of course you've had bushfires in Australia every year, but we haven't had them to the same extent, and they're getting worse. And this is one of the reasons. If you look at the average temperatures in Australia, for example, over the last 100 years, the last 2 years are massively ahead of what we've seen over the last 100 years. So of course, it's going to make weather events more extreme. There's a lot more energy being generated into the atmosphere and the weather systems. You may or may not know, but around 50% of the UK's CO2 emissions comes from either the construction or use of existing and new buildings. So as a construction industry, we can do more than almost any other sector to address climate change. We've got this 2050 target, but we are trying to go faster. And I think it's incumbent on businesses like ours to be the first movers to try and show we can go further and faster than other businesses. A couple of people have alluded to the elephant in the room, which is embodied carbon. When we build a new house, it's the construction process, all of those materials being manufactured, quarried, brought to site and erected, generate about 50 to 60 tons of CO2 emissions. And then when that house is finished, it emits something like 5 tons a year. So an average house built today in 2020 will emit 200 tons of CO2 by 2050. So that embodied carbon is quite significant. Even if we get to zero carbon emissions in use, you've still got a big chunk of embodied carbon. And one of the ironic and perverse things is actually the more energy efficient we try to make our buildings, quite often the more carbon we emit at the construction stage. So when most people are talking about zero carbon, including the government, what they mean is it doesn't emit any CO2 in use. But actually it's not addressing the embodied carbon. So we need to address both. We need to get to reduce our embodied carbon as well as reducing or eliminating our operational emissions. Now, a lot of the climate scenarios that we have at the moment, looking at how we're going to get to zero carbon by 2050, are looking at technologies that don't yet exist. It's assuming we can look at ways to capture and store carbon from the atmosphere. Sounds very simple. This cartoon makes it look very simple. You just collect the carbon that's being emitted from industry and we bury it underground. It is incredibly complicated, and it's only being done at a very small scale at the moment. Good news is the natural environment already has a carbon capture and storage mechanism. It's called plants and trees. Bio-based materials lock up CO2. As they grow through photosynthesis, they capture carbon dioxide and they turn it into cellulose. And if you go through the chemistry and the maths of it, you find that it actually takes 1.8 kilos of CO2 to make a kilo of cellulose. So you've got a multiplication factor working for us. It's not just trees, it's all plants, and the faster plants grow, the more they lock up CO2. Hemp is a very fast growing plant. Now, when a lot of you think about hemp, you probably think it's a bit of a hippie material. It's closely associated with marijuana. It's a cousin of marijuana, but actually what we're talking about is industrial hemp. It's very fast growing. From planting seed to harvesting a crop at 3 or 4 meters high takes 14 weeks. And it locks up carbon faster than trees or almost anything else on the planet. And it's been used in industry for the last 20 years. In fact, the whole world economy has been built on hemp for the last few centuries. Ropes and sails. Henry VIII made it mandatory for all farms over a certain size to grow hemp so that we could have a navy. But more recently, the automotive industry has been looking at hemp and other natural fibers. If anybody drives a BMW, all your interior door panels, parcel shelves, dashboard, it's all natural fiber rather than glass fiber these days. And the 3 Series and 5 Series BMWs have been using hemp for door panels and things for many, many years. So although it sounds a bit hippie and a bit wacky, it's actually quite high tech. My briefcase here is hemp, if anybody wants to have a look. It just uses a hemp and a resin. And there was a recent report that said if we could plant 1 trillion trees, those trees would absorb enough CO2 to solve the climate crisis in one single hit. And you may have even caught over the last few days, even President Trump has signed up to the commitment to globally plant 1 trillion trees. Sounds a huge number, but Ethiopia managed to plant 350 million trees in a single day, allegedly. That's now a world record. So if we're all doing that sort of thing, I met a retired doctor who's based in Malawi, and he's planted 5 million trees on his own land over the last few years. So we can all be doing this sort of thing. We are coming into the age of wood. Here's an article from the New Scientist that talks about all sorts of things that we can do using wood. And on the right-hand side there is a skyscraper that's been designed in Chicago out of wood. In London, we're building multi-story buildings out of cross-laminated timber, and there is a design going forward for a skyscraper in London built out of wood. So wood is a very versatile material. We've been using it for construction for centuries, and it locks up lots of CO2. The houses that we build, this is coming back full circle, we build our houses at Greencore out of wood, hemp, and natural fibre insulations. All of these materials that have absorbed and are sequestering biogenic carbon. So as a business, our purpose is to accelerate the transition, the global transition to low carbon living. And we're going to do that by scaling up the delivery of low carbon homes until they can no longer be ignored by the mainstream. How many do we need to build before the mainstream stops ignoring us? We don't really know, but we're launching our plan today for 500, and we want to lead by example so that we can change the construction industry forever. The more bio-based materials we incorporate into buildings, the more carbon we lock up. It's not rocket science. And the choices that we make during that design process about the finishes, the materials, the shape, the design, they determine not only the carbon footprint of the building, but they determine how it performs as well. And we now know that we can build houses that have 0 carbon footprint and 0 emissions. I think it was Nina mentioned, it's crazy to still build houses today in 2020 that are going to need retrofitting in the next few years. We've got to be building houses now that hit those targets. And so we've been trying to put this into practice. As a company, we started with single houses and we've been scaling up. This is a project that we've been doing with Oxford Advanced Living at Longcott. It's 15 homes, 6 affordable that Sovereign Housing have taken, and we've got a great representation here from Sovereign today, so thank you very much for coming. These have got a near 0 carbon footprint, and when I say near 0 carbon, it may well be 0 carbon. We haven't done an actual audit on these houses. We have audited other houses that have been 0 or below in some cases. They're designed in accordance with the Passive House principles, and we believe that they're delivering the Passive House levels of thermal performance. And working with Bioregional, they were awarded One Planet Living status. Now, as builders, and particularly me as a scientist, I'm not too bad on the hard bits, the carbon, the energy and that sort of thing. but Bioregional have brought a great level of expertise on the softer things like health and happiness and community. It's very easy as builders and engineers and architects to get focused on the nuts and bolts of energy and carbon. So the One Planet Living framework is really, really good for us to make us aware of all those other things that we need to be thinking about. So when we did Longcott, and it's 2 weeks away from finishing now, we did that with Oxford Advanced Living, and that was a groundbreaking project. We've taken the learning from that, and we've been able to work with another client, Sassy Property, to do this project at South Springfield Meadows. And this is 25 homes. It's on site under construction at the moment. So the first 12 are up to roof level at the moment. And we've been on site since April. It's going quite well. And our targets are here a little bit more ambitious. Still the same near zero carbon footprint, the passive house energy performance, but we've set ourselves the target to be net zero energy in use. And this is where we think it's the greenest scheme in the country at the moment, because we don't think any other schemes are delivering zero carbon footprint and net zero energy in use. And we've also, through guidance with Bioregional, put a car club in. At 25 houses, it's just about achievable to have a car club, and that's going to be electric cars and a car sharing scheme for the houses as well. We've got, thanks to Mike Roberts for the introduction and liaison to BBOUT, the Berks, Bucks and Oxen Wildlife Trust. We've got what we think is the first partnership between a commercial developer and the Wildlife Trust, and they're advising on the ecology and nature on the site, and then they're going to monitor it for the next 5 years and report back to us and the residents in the scheme as well. We've also got better transport links here. Longcott is not well connected by bus. Southmoor has got a great bus service just at the end of the road. So all of these things have helped this scheme get One Planet Living global leadership status. And the project is now funded by Triodos Bank. This is the first private housing scheme that Triodos have funded, which is a great step forward. Triodos have been one of the leaders in ethical banking for many years, but they've not funded any private schemes until now. And here's the secret formula. I say secret, but we're not wanting to keep it secret. It's something we're happy to share because we want other people to do the same. So it's not rocket science. We use bio-based materials to lock up carbon. The passive house thermal performance comes from some basic principles. High levels of insulation, designing out thermal bridges, getting excellent levels of air tightness. And this is where the two guys on the right come in. This is Serge and Marian, two of our Romanian guys who have taken air tightness to a level that none of us thought was possible. Their background is in welding submarines in Romania. So they're used to keeping water out, but building regulations have a target of 10. We set ourselves a target of 1 or below. Passive house is 0.6 or below. These guys have achieved up to 10 times better than the passive house standard, which I think is a UK record. We've had to hold them back a bit because they're determined to try and get to 0. And then we have triple glazed windows, which come from our partners at Rationale, who are here. And then a very simple electric strategy for hot water and heating and cooking. And then we use PVs to generate the energy and batteries to store it. So there's nothing here that is that complicated or couldn't be done by a much wider group of people. One of the arguments that's often used for people not doing zero carbon housing or low carbon housing is that it's too expensive. So I wanted to set out, if you buy a new house, where does all the cost come from? And this is an amalgam of several projects, and obviously every project is going to be different. But if you start at the top here, the sort of 12 o'clock on the clock, you've got the basic land value. So that's land as an agricultural value. And then moving around clockwise, you've got a chunk of money that goes into promoting that land. That's all the design and lobbying through the planning process in order to get planning permission. That's quite an expensive process, and the consultants that do it get paid quite handsomely for it. If it's then successful in getting planning consent, The landowner then gets a big uplift in the value of the land. That's called planning gain. Part of winning planning permission is that you have to pay some money to the council, either through a Section 106 or more recently through community infrastructure or SIL, and then you get on to design. But the actual construction cost, the green sector here, is only about 41% of the finished cost of the house. And actually, if you break that down and say, well, how much of that really affects the thermal and carbon performance, it's probably 20% of that. So the bits that actually affect the performance of our house are probably 8% of the total cost of what you're paying. And then you've got things like the infrastructure on site, all the roads and drains, and you've got the finance costs and the marketing to sell it, and then the developer's profit. So I think it's important to understand how all the costs are made up, because we believe that we can build zero carbon actually at no extra cost. But there are other people who say there is a premium, and the accepted premium in the industry is that it's somewhere between £5,000 and £10,000 a unit. So if you look at this value chain, where are the places that we can squeeze £5,000 or £10,000 a unit out of it? There are plenty of places where you could take the whole lot out of one place, or you can squeeze a bit out of several areas. And that's what we need to do. So we are looking at things. We've been suggesting to councils, for example, that they might have a variable SIL structure. A bit like you do, electric cars don't pay road tax, but gas guzzlers pay an awful lot. Could you have low or little SIL for passive house and zero carbon houses and put the SIL up for everybody else? I think you could. Can you simplify the planning process so that you haven't got to spend so much on the promotion? Or can you find landowners who don't need such a huge windfall planning gain? Can you find developers who are willing to accept lower profits? And are there cheaper ways to finance it? All of those sorts of things. So there are plenty of places that we can squeeze money out of that process. But actually, they're not the construction side. The construction only being 40%. And that's what most of the big PLC house builders do. When they look to save money, they say, well, can we squeeze it out of construction? And this is in line with what you might have seen in the press, where Bellway say that they make an average of 58% on all the houses that they sell. That's because they're taking the planning gain, they're doing the land promotion, they've got the developer's profit, all of those chunks that are not to do with the construction. So we can build houses that have got a low or zero carbon footprint and deliver passive house performance. So our mission is to try and make sure all houses are built this way. And we think One Planet Oxfordshire and the work that we're doing with Bioregional is a great catalyst for this to happen. And Oxfordshire is a really exciting place to be working at the moment. Oxfordshire has lots of credibility and history of science with the universities, places like this at Culham, Harwell, and we can be the centre of the transition to a low carbon economy. But over the last year, we have learnt that although we were probably doing okay, we were doing pretty well, we can do better. And one of the things, this is a quote I've heard many people say, do the best you can until you know better, and then when you know better, do better. Everything that we have done to date has been about trying to minimize the negative impact on the environment. But what about if we could turn it on its head and create a positive impact on the environment? If every time we built a house, it was actually positive for the environment. And so our plan to deliver 500 houses is to deliver 500 climate positive houses. We can make simple tweaks to our design process and construction process that lock up more carbon than they emit. We now know that we can generate more energy than we use. We can increase wildlife and biodiversity more than we have been. And we can use our projects as a catalyst for local initiatives, whether it's energy, food, transport, waste. So we want to take this going beyond the passive house standard and beyond what we've done before, and deliver 500 climate positive houses. We also want to create a green business park so that we can attract like-minded businesses to the area, because life gets easier if you're surrounded by people doing the same sort of things. And we're extremely fortunate to have all of you here in the audience who are like-minded and wanting to do similar things. Here are some of the non-domestic hemp buildings that we've been involved in building before. So on the left, we've got the Adnams Brewery warehouse that was actually done in 2005, 2006, has been saving £100,000 a year in energy bills ever since it was built, because it's a temperature controlled warehouse, but it's got no heating and cooling. It's all entirely passively regulated by storing beer in strategic places around the building. You can do that if you're a brewery. Not everybody can. I don't have enough beer at home to regulate the temperature. And then Marks and Spencer's on the right hand side. This is the biggest Marks and Spencer's outside Oxford Street. It's at Cheshire Oaks, and Stuart Dennis is here. We work with Stuart on this scheme. It's 195,000 square foot, £44 million M&S superstore, and it only uses 40% of the heating energy it was predicted to use. It's been monitored extensively since it was finished. So we could be doing this on a whole business park and encouraging all of you. We could all relocate to green business park and green buildings. So we need your help, and we think there are at least 3 ways that you can get involved here. So do you know a landowner who wants to leave a legacy to be proud of? Do you know an investor who wants to make a positive impact as well as making a profit? And do you have the skills, products, services to help deliver these projects? I know the answers to a lot of those things in the room are yes. If we look at landowners, first of all, we've identified several sites that collectively could deliver over 1,000 houses. So we don't need to get them all delivered, but we are looking for additional landowners who are supportive, particularly where the sites are already allocated in the local plan. But we need a pipeline of sites for future years as well. So although we're planning to deliver 500 over the next 5 years, I don't think we're then going to retire and stop at the end of 5 years. This is the start of a journey. If I look at a typical site that we're looking at here, it's a 100-acre site. It's in a village in southwest Oxfordshire. We think it's suitable to put somewhere between 200 and 250 climate positive houses. Excuse me. The village needs a school, and that school should be a climate positive school. Getting children engaged. Lewis is not here to answer this, but what they've done at Northwest Bicester is build a great school. So the education starts with the junior school, and by the time children leave school, sustainability is part of what they know and understand. There's sufficient space to create a nature park here and plant trees and wildflowers and all of that sort of thing. And then we hope to be working with the people from Westmill to look at about 10 megawatts of solar energy and maybe wind turbines. We need to look at that. We think that will make the neighbouring village zero energy, the first net zero energy village in the country. So it's not just about delivering zero carbon houses, it's spreading that benefit to local communities as well. If we think about the investment side and the finance, we're going to set up a new company. At the moment we have a working title of Greencore Homes, and that company will have £1 million of capital which will be used to drive the planning process on 3 or 4 sites. We've got strong commitments and indications of interest from a number of investors who are going to fund that, and we have enough coming through to begin with that we can start the process relatively soon. We'll be looking at raising some money into Greencore because we're a small company, and if we're going to set our sites bigger, we're going to need more of a stronger financial backing to be able to do this. And then we need to look at how the projects are funded, and some of that will be by working with partners, joint ventures with housing associations. We'll be looking at equity funding from some of the investors that we already work with, and debt funding from people like Triodos. But if we split it down into those 3 tiers, we can get going relatively quickly, and it's relatively easily deliverable. Sassy Property that we're working with at Springfield is called Sassy Property because it uses SAS pension funds. That's small self-administered schemes. So people who've got their own small self-administered pension scheme have invested into that project through Sassy Property, and that's a great resource that we can tap into. And then partners. We know that we can achieve more by working with partners. It's called leverage. We can do 3 times as much by working with another partner than we could do on our own or independently. We've already got a strong core team, but all of you in this room are key to helping us deliver this project. We need your help. And so we've got the plan for the houses, the business park, the PV farm, but we've got a feedback form on your seat that we'd like you to have a look at and complete. Do you want to be part of that plan? Do you know other people that you think we should be talking to? Who have we missed out? Do you know of suitable land opportunities? Are you a landowner that would like to be working with us? Do you know of suitable investors? That kind of feedback is very important to us. And if you take the time to fill out those forms, we will take the time to link up with you. Do you want to set up meetings to talk about different aspects of this? Do you think we're mad? Are there things that you know that we don't? All of these sorts of things. So your feedback, the answer is yes, we are mad. But as they say, the best way to predict the future is to create it. And I think this was Abraham Lincoln who first said this. But a bit like Martin in his quotes, these things get misquoted and overquoted. So I can't be certain. But it's certainly true. We are going to create the future. We are going to do this. We will do it on our own if we have to. But we will be much stronger and more efficient and faster if we can work with all of you. So thank you very much.